Well, you took Underworld, and you've also written a lot of the comics and stuff surrounding
Yes.
it. You want to talk? Was that your first step into the comics world, or were you doing comics before Underworld adaptation?
No. I was a big comic book collector. You know, I've been collecting comics since I was 12. So I have a vast collection of Marvel comics, some DC, and that was where my passion lay, you know, creatively. But I never thought I would actually be in the film industry or comic industry, like I said. So I didn't enter, you know, I tried to get into comic books in 87, I think. I got my first rejection letters from Marvel, and I still have them. But it wasn't until, I think, 2004, when a friend of mine, I met a good friend of mine, and he gave me what I thought was the key to success in the film and comic book industry, even though I had already done Underworld when I met him. And what he showed me is how to create IPs, intellectual properties. And that's when I started thinking and said, you know what, there's a way to marry the two in order to, you know, garner a decent, you know, career in both. And because I did that and created my own comics, that's when I got an opportunity at Marvel Comics, you know. And so they all kind of work, you know, together in concert.
So the Marvel property was one of your original ideas when you were growing up.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I created a character called the Blue Marvel, and he's part of the Ultimates now. And I created that character, at least in part, when I was a kid. So it was kind of a dream come true to have one of your comic creations, you know, come to life and now be part of the Marvel universe. So that was cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the IPs that you were just talking about, I, Frankenstein,
Yes.
How did that kind of come about? Was it a comic first? Was it a script first?
Well, the thing is, I realized the way the industry, the creative industry, the film industry, or television industry works. And, you know, you can be erased at any time. Because once you sell an idea to a studio, it becomes theirs. So even though I wanted to make I, Frankenstein into a movie always, I felt that creating it as a comic book, you know, would ensure that single title credit.
Yeah.
And so everyone knew who created it, how, blah, blah, blah. And so you write the screenplay as well. So what you do is you do them simultaneously. You write the screenplay and the comic and the screenplay. And you get them out there, you know, so people can see. And the comic pages you create becomes the, I guess, visual hook for a prospective buyer to, you know, buy your screenplay. And that's what I did, you know. And, you know, I was also inspired to do that by one of the other guests, Steve Niles. Steve Niles wrote a screenplay for 30 Days of Night, and as the story goes, and it didn't sell. So then I guess IDW came to him and wanted to do a comic book of it. He said yes, and before you know it, everyone said, well, you should make this a screenplay. You know, and it's like, you know, that's weird, you know. And so you kind of realize how to manipulate the industry, or maximize, I should say, what you do to manipulate the industry, so to speak. And that's how you really start on this path of creation.
Yeah. I was just talking to him on Friday we had a 10th anniversary screening at the Draft House, and he said that the day that the comic book came out, the first issue, he started getting calls from studios.
Yeah,
so it's like, you know, it's making your own path. And I think
exactly.
That's a big...
And that's what you have to do because, you know, you can't wait for, like if you're a creative person, you can't wait for the larger industry to come after you. Or you can't wait around for, you know, them to choose you to work on one of their things. It's best if you create your own, you know. And I think that's the best way to, I'm not going to say ensure your success, but, you know, bettering, you know, it will better your eyes.
That's awesome. So maybe let's talk about projects you have that maybe you're trying to make into movies or that are about to be made into movies.
Yeah, I have a few things, some I can't talk about.
Yeah,
you know,
of course.
Some I can.
You can, we just won't tell anybody. Turn off the cameras,
Yeah, there's one I'm working on now called the Jekyll and Hyde Detective Agency. And so that's a comic that's going to be coming out sometime next year or the year after. But I've already finished the screenplay, and we're going to be starting to cast soon. So that's a good thing, but just working on other things like that.
Were you influenced by the Universal monsters when you were young?
Oh, of course. I think for Underworld, I always liked the House of Frankenstein, the House of Dracula, where, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Dracula meet, and, kind of fight, and then Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, so, I've always wanted to see Frankenstein fight the mummy, but it didn't happen. But, that was my impetus for Underworld, and also Frankenstein, my original plans were to create a monster world, but they screwed it up, and it just did nothing in the box office, and, but I will revisit.
How was the makeup process like for your character in I, Frankenstein?
It wasn't as long as, let's say, my working on Planet of the Apes or Men in Black 2, because the makeup, it was more of a mask and less prosthetic. So, where on Planet of the Apes, my makeup time might have been 3 hours because of Rick Baker's, intricate makeup. It didn't take as long, and it, really wasn't as good. Really wasn't as good.
What was the inspiration? What would you say is the inspiration to the creation of the characters for you?
There were a couple of things. One was some interracial dating I had done, and seeing as how, people respond to you when you're with someone of another race, Also, like this gentleman mentioned earlier, it was the Universal monsters, things like that, that I really liked, the most. Another thing, and this is, just an addendum to your question, what I try to do when I create something is look for a hole in the marketplace, what has not been done, or what has not been done right, and see if you can find a way to fit something in there. Like, the werewolves versus vampires. It was sitting right there in front of everyone, but no one had ever had the temerity to go ahead and actually do it on film. You see what I'm saying? They might have talked about it, hinted at it in comic books, but never this star-crossed love story incorporating Romeo and Juliet thing and applying it to a interracial love story that spanned a centuries-old race war. You know what I'm saying? And so, you look at things like that and you take that philosophy, and there's a lot of stories out there that you can tell, metaphorically, using monsters or mutants or what have you,
So in regard to writing endings, do you approach them differently from if you're writing comics as opposed to a screenplay?
Well, nowadays, everything is a franchise. They try and make, milk everything, for as long as they can. So you can have an ending for a particular story you have within that universe, but you should probably expand it more. Now having said that, I look at Star Wars, and I am not a huge Star Wars universe fan. I like Star Wars, but I thought the first movie was perfect, and it ended perfectly. Even though I liked Empire Strikes Back, really, I don't. I think you probably should have ended, there. You probably should have ended there. But so, with comic books, everyone likes these characters, and because of the marketplace of comic books, the stories never really end, and the characters can never really grow. You know what I'm saying? You might have some stories where they do, but some other writer might come along and say, you know what? I don't want this to end like that. I mean, look at the Thing, for instance. You know, how long can the Thing mope about not being human? You know, he's the idol of millions, like he says. He has a beautiful girlfriend, or at least did in Alicia and all that. So who cares that you don't look human, you know? So do you stop that? Or is that a permanent part of his character to lament the loss of his humanity? I don't know. You know, does it make sense? I don't know. You know, the argument can be made that the reason why you keep these things in play is because there is a growing new audience, or there's a new audience that comes in every year or so. And so you keep things fresh for them. But, you know, the comic book industry isn't really growing any new fans. You know, it's mostly old men, you know, 35 years of age and up. You know, young people don't buy comics anymore. You know, they're too expensive, you know. So I don't know. You know, it really depends on your philosophy.
That's interesting you bring it up, kind of like the MJ Peter Parker marriage, right? They married and then they had the whole deal with the devil and turned it off just to bring him back to where he used to be. There's only a finite number of stories, really.
Well, I don't necessarily believe that. I understand what you mean and why you say it. But my opinion is that you're always going to you only have finite stories if you limit the amount of people that you go to tell the story. You know, so I have a lot of Hulk stories, but I don't have an infinite amount of Hulk stories. But if you hire someone else, they're going to have Hulk stories that are different than yours. But the comic book industry doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
The comic book industry is woefully incestuous. So they're going to go to the same people all the time. So you're only going to have but so many stories coming out of those individuals. And they don't really like to hire new people despite what they tell you. You know, you hire your friends, you hire people you know, and that's it. So.
Well, that's interesting because you just said like it's not growing anymore, but you look at the box office and the Marvel movies are the biggest movies of the year. You know, so people are enjoying these stories. So what's the disconnect there? What do you think is?
I think the disconnect is it can be a myriad of things. It's kind of like movies are movies, comics are comics. And you can jump on board a movie because you're creating a new mythology that oftentimes, even though it is springboarded from the comics, it's vastly different. Comic books tend to be, I'm not going to tell you that they're impenetrable, you know, but there are many issues,
right?
You know, and where do you start? You know, if you're a new fan and no one knows.
Right.
Like when I first started reading, like let's say the Fantastic Four, which is my favorite comic of all time, probably. There were only 165 issues, and when I started collecting, comics were only 25 cents. So you could buy a bunch of books, you know, and catch up really fast.
Right.
You know, now you had to hunt for the older books, but they still weren't that expensive. Now, even though comic books, if you get the reprints or omnibuses, they're functionally cheaper, but there are tomes and tomes of books you have to pour over, and no one's going to do that, you know. And so, you know, and plus, like I said, the expense of just some of the regular single issues that you buy from month to month. You know, like I said, I started out, they were 25 cents. Now, they're almost $5. You know, and I say almost $5 because even if they're $3.99, with tax, it's $4.51, you see. So it's like, no, you know, you're not going to get kids to buy those things, you know. I just can't see it.
Well, with DC and Marvel trying to do like the Rebirth and the New 52 and just setting the numbers back to 1, that was relatively successful, but then they keep rebooting, right? So what do you think
They keep rebooting is because there's a thought that maybe will hook new people, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But once again, it's only the older fans who have a love for the characters, the way they're presented in the marketplace when it comes to comics. And to be quite frank, they're the only ones who have the money, to buy on a monthly basis. And the way the comic book industry also works is that it recycles trends. So that's why they keep going back to the same well. But, there are new markets opening in terms of graphic novels, bookstores, digital things like, digital comics and comicsology and all
Right.
that. But, is that making an actual difference in the month-to-month sales? And I don't think it is. Now, I will say this much. I think that people are buying more independent books than they ever have, because they're new, and that market is burgeoning, so I think that's a good thing. But even then, the sales are not stellar. Like I tell people, if you come out with a good book, if you come out with a new book, you should not expect to go over 3,500 units, per month. And that's for your first issue, but then it's going to drop significantly with the second issue and third issue and so forth. So, but if you want to be in the industry, that's the way the market is, The money comes from turning your IP into a TV show or a movie, or a video game, That's where you make your money, and that's when it becomes, very, very worth it.
Did you have any say in Underworld Blood Wars?
No, not at all. Producers take their own cues, and so that's why, depending upon the franchise, it's the reason why there's no thorough continuity from one film to the next. Because what they'll do is they'll hire different writers. And then there are different mandates from studios or other producers or directors, for instance. Like the only way to ensure, and then, the producers have to understand that maybe the way to do these things is to keep the same creative team, so you can keep the universe intact. But a lot of what happens in filmmaking is predicated upon the amount of money you have to work with too, and whether or not you think something done previously will work, or should be there from one movie to the next. Like for instance, with Underworld, one of the things that I tried to stay away from was mysticism. Let vampirism be based on science, and lycanthropy be based on science, not mysticism. So I eschewed all the, erotic stuff associated with vampirism. Things like you can't see, a vampire can't see his reflection. If you can see him in real life, you should be able to see his reflection too. But one of the things I always hated about vampires is the super speed. The super speed makes them invincible and unkillable. And like for instance, they had Kate move at super speed in the second Underworld movie. But in the first one, if she was that fast, why was she running from me? You see what I'm saying? And it's like, but it doesn't matter. A lot of them, for a lot of them, it does not matter. It's like, no one cares. But there are people who do, and that it can make a lot of your story lose its, logistical foundation if you don't keep that continuity, If we were in danger or if the vampires were that live, just zip around, crack, kill all the Lycans with one to the back of the head. It's easy. You can move at super speed, but you see, that's not the way it works. Here I am running from one of the other vampires, and he doesn't use the super speed to catch up. See, yeah, yeah, but you can't say that. It's always shh. We'll see. But producers are usually not genre people. They don't really like this stuff. They like that, cheddar.
Sir, how did you become involved in Underworld in the first place?
I created it.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah, so basically it's my idea. Now, to go a little further, the project began with Len Wiseman. He was a director. So he was a client at ICN, which is a big agency. And they weren't sending him any scripts that he liked. So he got a call from, I think it was Dimension Films. Have you heard of them?
yes.
Yeah. And they wanted to do a werewolf movie that did for vampires what Blade did. So he called me and he said, well, you have any ideas, we could do? I was like, because werewolf movies, they haven't been very successful. They're not as, quote unquote, sexy as vampire movies, and that's for a myriad of reasons. How do you make a good werewolf? What's the morphology of the creature? Is it going to be, hirsute, snout-nosed, look like a hairy man, what have you, no one knows. And there have only been 2 werewolf movies to speak of that were any good. Maybe 3 if you go back to the classic Lon Chaney movie from 1941. So, I came up with an idea that Len liked. And I mulled it over in my head for a while. And then he said, well, I think we should meet now to go over it and really try to nail it down. So after we finished our session, I said, well, look, we can't go in there with just one idea. If they don't like it, we're stuck, He says, well, and I said, well, look, I have this idea. And I said, what if we do a Romeo and Juliet story? But instead of Montagues and Capulets, we have werewolves on one side, but vampires on the other. And make it like this surrealistic interracial love story that, has spanned, had a backdrop of a centuries-old race war. And he just folded his arms and looked at his feet and was like, I don't know, dude, is this gonna work? And here we are 5 movies later. Yeah.
So this was your property. What is it that, how did the rights end up going where you were not involved with it?
Well, the thing is, it was my first project that got picked up. And, as the saying goes, you might have to give the first one away. You know what I'm saying? That oftentimes is the price of admission, because you're not going to have any power, and I was unrepresented at the time. So the thing is, you need to start your career. You're not getting any younger. And if any of you ever had designs of doing anything creative, you have to understand that you have a limited time period, in which to make it before reality sets in. You have to get a real job, or what happens if things don't work out. And so, the thing is, I said, look, let me just get something going to start the career. And so you make that sacrifice, and you let the chips fall where they may, and that's what happens. And even though Underworld was a cult classic or a hit or what have you, it went around town, and it still took a while to sell. And there were producers who said, we like the script, but you have a new director, a first-time director, first-time writers. It's like, I don't know. And then no one has ever done, werewolves versus vampires before, and they'll ask crazy questions, well, why are there so many werewolves? Why are there so many vampires, Then other people will say, like, we went to this one company, and they said that we love this, but we have to take out all the action. And it's like, then why are you gonna do it then? So imagine no action. So you just have people standing around talking, and so it loses its coolness. So then why would you even want to buy it? Another thing, some producers might not understand bipedal snout-nosed werewolves, or they don't have the money. This one group said that they wanted all the Lycans to have like mutton chops and long fingernails, you know, and they should look more like Sabretooth of the X-Men. And it's like, you know, but this is why so many good ideas get jacked up, you know, and there's nothing you can do unless you have, you know, $25 million in your pocket, you know, to shoot at yourself. If you don't, this is what you're up against, and there's nothing you can do. In fact, with Underworld, Lakeshore bought it and ultimately made it and did a good job with it. But it was passed on twice at Lakeshore. It just so happened that it came in the back door the third time and got a yes all the way up until it reached the president who turned it down twice. And it's like, so that's just the way it works.
What was your original idea for the finale of Celine? Like, what was your, did you want to kill her off?
No.
What did you have coming after?
I had a lot of different ideas of where I wanted it to go. I can't tell you because I don't want to keep funny the ideas, but yeah, because I might still use them in something else. But it was going to be vastly different. Yeah, because I'm not necessarily happy with what they've done with it so far. Yes, sir.
Do you intend to kill off your own character and
No.
Michael Sheen?
No. But you see, the thing is, that's one of the things that's a result of, I mean, film is very collaborative, you know what I'm saying? And you don't have ultimate power. You know, one of the things that writers oftentimes complain about is the lack of power when they actually create these properties. If you want to look at a good treatise on that, there is a two-part documentary series called Tales from the Script, and that basically, you know, will tell you about what writers have to go through in this industry.
Have you done an audiobook or anything? Because you got the best voice.
No, I haven't had the pleasure, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about your next movie coming out, right?
Like I said, it's called, it might be called the Jekyll and Hyde Detective Agency. And it's what I Frankenstein should have been, you know. And we'll see what happens with that.
What drew you to this genre?
You know, I tried to figure that out over the years. And I would probably say if I had to choose, it was probably my love for dinosaurs. Because dinosaurs were real monsters. You know what I mean? So that kind of acclimated me to things that are otherworldly, you know, abnormal in terms of what you see every day, things like that, and one thing led to another. So that was probably it. So.
Earlier you mentioned writing for Marvel and creating a new character that's incorporated in one of those teams. What
Yes.
was that again?
The Blue Marvel.
Blue Marvel.
The Blue Marvel, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the first issue, the miniseries that it sprang from was called Adam, Legend of the Blue Marvel.
Okay.
Yes.
And was there some kind of inspiration to that character?
Yes. It was twofold. Number one, you know, when you're a kid and you're drawing and you're reading comic books, you know, you kind of want to try your hand at doing that. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, and you have them fighting Marvel characters or DC characters, but it's also a black character. And when I was coming up, there weren't a lot of black characters, and the black characters that they did have were not my favorite comic book characters. My favorite ones were the Fantastic Four, and the Hulk was kind of like this, and then after that it was Thor. But the Blue Marvel is based upon the premise. What if Superman were black? Or what if the most powerful superhero in the world was black, but you didn't know that because he wore a costume, because of the time period that covered his whole body? And how would the world react if they found out? And that was the story of the Blue Marvel, you know? So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, you were talking about the Monster Universe, like from the 50s and 60s,
am not a fan of remakes, really. You know, I don't know, because I think that there was a certain charm to the movies of yesteryear, the way they were made, and conceptually, you know, there are some that I think the technology would benefit. You know, the new technology would benefit. You know, they would be benefited by the new technology. But my favorite old-time movie was The Thing from Another World. You know, the 1951 movie with James Arness and Kenneth Tobey. And of course, John Carpenter remade it, and it was vastly different. It was more like the book. But, you know, I love that film, you know. King Kong is another one of my favorite big monsters, and they remade that. But I didn't think the first remake was good. The second one was better, but it got a little Steven Spielbergian. And by that I mean that even though I think Peter Jackson is a great filmmaker and Spielberg is too, I don't like the fact that they try to make these things too much of a 4-quadrant movie, and so they do a lot of kid stuff. Like, I thought it was cool for him to fight 2 Tyrannosaurus Rexes, but once you start fighting 3, and then you're flipping a girl up in the air, catching her with her foot, you know, and I'm like, here we go, you know. You know, I don't like stuff like that. But, I don't know. Like I said, I don't like remakes, but we'll see, you know.
We have
Now,
time
you
for
had
a final
another
question, yeah.
When the Underworld movies were being put up, did you have any say so as far as the casting?
No. I had a couple of suggestions, you know, but ultimately the producers are going to make those decisions. You start looking at, like, I remember thinking that when we first started looking at actresses, Halle Berry's name came up, you know. She was younger then, you know, I thought that might be a good choice. I liked Jason Isaacs for Lucian, you know. None of us had ever heard of Bill Nighy before, but, you know, he turned out to be a charm. Good guy to work with, you know.
I think that's all the time we have. Give it up one more time for